Because It's There with Sarah Khumalo is proudly sponsored by Vuma.
So hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, as you join us on this podcast, Because It's There, a podcast that looks at leadership. You know, George Mallory was once asked, why climb Everest? And he said, because it's there. Why be a leader? Because in spite everything, in spite where we are, what others have said, we are all leaders. It's within us. And who better than Sharron to tell us all about leadership? Somebody that's worked around the world with women, with children, with leaders, and with the man on the street. And today I'm super excited to welcome Sharron to Because It's There. Welcome, Sharron.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Saray. So one of the things I have to do right up front is I have to tell you I pronounce my name Sharron.
Sharron.
You would never know. Many people, I just let it go. But you know, as I'm getting older and I'm stepping into the fullness of my own, I realize that names are important. Absolutely. And so my name actually is the name of the place in Palestine where Isaac was, according to biblical lore, where Abraham was to sacrifice Isaac. And in that place was a flower, and that valley is called the Sharron Valley. Sure. And so my name means beauty and justice.
Absolutely. Sharron. I'm going to say
Sharron. Yes, darling.
Thank you for that. It is a beautiful name and a beautiful story to it, Sharron. Yeah. So welcome to Because It's There.
Thank you.
Let's start with a sentence, really, which I would like you to finish as really an icebreaker. The last thing I laughed so hard about is?
The last thing, oh my God, that's such a good one. Okay. The last thing I laughed so hard about was actually this morning. So I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm an American who lives in South Africa. It's my adopted country. I've lived in South Africa for 23 years now. You know, I mentioned I teach at the Graduate School of Business in Cape Town. And so I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm from this part of the world. I'm dealing with family and friends and COVID and da-da-da-da-da. And one of my business partners is someone who I love so much. Her name is Margaret O'Connor, and she recently immigrated from South Africa to the UK. Yeah. She's visiting in Washington, D.C., and I haven't been able to see her because of schedules or whatever. So I am to actually have lunch with her today. But I was thinking about her and she was thinking about me, and we were saying, oh, we love you. I love you. I miss you. I miss you. And in the midst of all the millions of people that are walking up and down the streets of Washington, D.C., who do I walk into on the street on yesterday? And I said, Margaret, is that you? She said, Sharron. And then we started screaming on the street in Washington, D.C. and people were like alarmed. Is there something going on? And I laughed today as I was actually, getting up and getting my tea, which I have. Yeah. And I laughed, really one of those belly laughs deep down inside of me, because I thought about synchronicity. And I thought about the intelligence of our universe, of our world, of our planet, and how there, in my opinion, there are just no coincidences, and just how funny life can be. So that was the last time I laughed, was literally about an hour ago.
Wow, sounds amazing. And it's interesting that you actually think about somebody and you meet them. You think about something and it drops on your laps. So that happens quite a lot.
It does. It really, really does. I believe it happens. And please make sure that I'm pronouncing your name correctly, because it's a beautiful name. Sarah. As well, as a matter of fact, our names are connected. So do I say Saray or Sarah or Sarah? Sarah. Yeah. So, Sharron is an offshoot of the root word of Sarah. So we'll have a conversation about our names at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what you're saying, I think, is interesting, because I really do believe what I said earlier about intelligence and how, all of us have had those situations where you think of someone and then they call you.
Yes.
Or you think of someone and they send you a text out of the blue. How are you doing? That's not a coincidence. I think that we're part of this web of life, and thoughts are things or energy, and we send them down the web and someone responds.
Absolutely.
That's how it happens.
That's how it happens. So let's get into Sharron. Looking at your professional exploit, you come across as a perpetual agent of change, right? So one is intrigued in how this pattern in your life came about. Has upbringing played a role, or is it something that you just stumbled along as you moved on in life?
Good question. I love it. Well, I guess that's why you are, the host of this podcast, because you are fabulous. Thank you for asking that question.
Thank you.
It really, when I look back at my life, I have to say, Sarah, that from a very early age, I wanted power. And I define power as the capacity to impact with purpose. I am the youngest of 8. I'm a preacher's kid. My mother was a teacher and my nurse, and my father actually was a bishop in Church of Christ, which is a big, big organization here in the United States. And so he was a very important person who was away a lot. But, we were a tribe. I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters. And as the youngest, I remember saving all of my money that I would get for Christmas on birthdays, and I would lend it to my brothers in particular who wanted to go on dates with girls. And then if they didn't pay me back the money, I'd say, well, that's not the girl you were on the date with last week. This is a different one. And so they said, hey, this little banker here, we must pay her on time. Otherwise she's coming back. I had to use whatever tools were in my arsenal to get my money back, and I would charge them interest as well. And we laugh about that at family gatherings because, they say you were doing that from the age of 6 or 7. We are not surprised that you went into financial services. I mean, I always worked in banks when I was a teenager for the summer as a teller or whatever. But why do I say power? We had a lot of love and we had a lot of books in our house. My parents were both well educated, which I realized makes me a very privileged person because they were adamant that we all be educated. And so even though I wore hand-me-downs, and we were actually quite poor when I look back. When I look back and you go back to your old house and you look at it and it seems so small and your neighborhood is so small and you realize that, wow, we were really like poor. But, we didn't know that. We were running around. We were trying to get money to get a cool drink and whatever. And we were recycling and taking our bottles to the store to get our pennies. And I had a great childhood, but I remember thinking that I wanted to have more power. I wanted to be able to influence things. And I think some of that has to do with being the youngest and being bossed around and pushed around and having to wear other people's clothes. I made up my mind at some point that I was not going to have, that was not going to be my fate in life.
Absolutely. I love it. I mean, power is sometimes misconstrued. It means different things to different people. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's what is that impact and how are you going to use it for good or not for good? So absolutely love that. So in a world that's been really turned around, I mean, you talk about COVID, not just here, everywhere, right? Where there is lesser confidence to make and take bold moves by governments and by individuals and communities, businesses as well. As a psychologically drained population, how do you see persistency in navigating as a change agent yourself in an environment such as this?
Okay, well, let me, with much respect, just make one point of clarification. I am an economic activist, and I consider myself a transformation agent. And I don't think of transformation and change as being the same thing. I think that transformation is different in terms of the quantum and the nature of the change that's involved. So I definitely consider myself a transformation agent. I'm a transformation lady.
Yes.
One of my giftings is to exhort, to encourage, to enable, and then to inspire. And we can come back to the notion of gifting, which is something that really drives me. But so as I teach, as I speak, as I learn, being a learner is one of my gifts. So I learn, and then I try to get to higher ground, and then I pull someone else up, and then I get to a higher ground, and then I go like this. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm on the planet. I use my gift of sight, my capacity to learn, my curiosity, and then I say, okay, there are giants in the land, but I think we can take them. And one of the reasons why I am a transformation agent is because I figured out a long time ago that by investing differently in women, I was going to get a multiplier effect. I was going to be able to positively affect members of the population in ways that would enable and inspire them to go and to do the same for others. And women are connected that way. And we can talk about the physiological reasons why. We can go back 100,000 years ago, because I like to study anthropology to understand some of those differences between men and women. And I know that gender is on a spectrum. So, I'm very much mindful that, I'm talking about men and women when we know that we can talk about LGBTQ and others along that spectrum. So I am a transformation agent. I think that we've moved from a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, to a Bonnie world, where it's brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and in many cases, incomprehensible. And if you look at the dispositions and the ways of being that we need, in whether it's government or civil society or business or in our personal space, most of those dispositions or ways of being that we need are anchored in the feminine.
Yes.
Can men lead this way? Absolutely. Most women are inclined to lead this way because of their history and their physiology. So I definitely believe it's time for women to step into the fullness of who they are called to be. I think our planet is on fire, in part because we have a lack of balance between the masculine and feminine energies on this planet today, which is why I spend so much time thinking and talking about transformation that leads towards a more feminine leadership.
Yeah, that's an interesting view. And thank you for the correction. I think transformation is actually crucial, especially now with where the world is. And one of the things that I'm so proud and excited about is looking at how countries led by women reacted to COVID when it came up, and how successful they were compared to the counterparts. Admittedly, there's more male-led countries than
sure, absolutely.
But I think that made me proud to be a woman. That gave me a lot more confidence to say, come on, let's get out there. We need it. This time is a time for us to lead. So that is exciting. So going back to transformation, right? Mm-hmm. When did you first realize that, that is your passion? That is something that, you'd be able to enjoy and make the most impact on in your life and in your career? I know that you probably touch on policy making as well, in that respect. When did you realize that this is my thing and go for it? Is it from childhood, college, or somewhere during your working journey?
I began to understand gifting and my capacity to impact with purpose pretty early on in life. And certainly by the time I was in college, and even in high school, most people would have considered me a leader. But I think we could also spend many podcasts talking about what is leadership, because I'm always wanting to get to the root, the meat of the thing. Like, when we say leadership, what are you talking about? And quite often, even still today, I am not a commander. That is not my gift. You would look at my background and you would say, well, you've been a CEO of this and that and the other. Surely you must be a commander. I actually quite often step into leadership as a result of a situation where my particular set of strengths are necessary. I lead because I'm interested in getting us over to this place. We need to summit. Okay, let's go, right? And so And then once we've summited, I'm like, okay, well, who's going to get us down this mountain? It's not me, and my job is done, right? So I'm sure you can relate to that metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of, giving your own leadership journey. When I worked on Wall Street as a banker, so I started off as a commercial banker working in banks when I was literally a teenager. I had done pretty much everything in a bank by the time I became an investment banker. I had a brief stint with JP Morgan, and then went back and became a big fish in kind of a smaller bank, was one of the first African-American women to lead in a capital markets division within a bank. That's where the real money is. And they tend to really not let, people who look like me back then play in that space, right? Mm-hmm. But I was a person who could see developments that were happening in the market. I mentioned gifting. That is part of my gifting. I don't think that I am any smarter than anyone else. I mean, if we look at people, for example, who are autistic, increasingly we're hiring them in the tech space because they are so incredibly gifted in the space in which, the lane in which they operate. I may be on the spectrum because my gifting is profound in my capacity to see where things are going. So I can look at the economy and I can say there's a new economic paradigm that's emerging. Here are the reasons why I say that. And so when I worked on Wall Street, I could see where things were going. So I spent a lot of time in structured finance products and derivatives. And that was when I began to understand that I could transform things. Because, Wall Street bankers being the greedy lot that, we were, I'm reformed. I can talk about them because I got out. But they would just kind of put a unit around me and say, well, let her go because she keeps being right. So let's let this lady go. And then some of the things that we got involved in ended up leading to the global financial crisis. So I didn't cause that all by myself, but I certainly needed a realignment of vision and values. And I think that speaks, in my opinion, to how talent and gifting and strength, if not aligned with shared vision and common ground, and if not being deployed for the greater good, can actually really, really be destructive. You've got great leaders and they're sitting in prison because they were leading a criminal syndicate, right?
That's
right. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I was very much aware of my need to transform. Once I quit that job, I went to South Africa. I became a clerk for Albie Sachs at the Constitutional Court. I never went back to the United States. And I think then I decided that I was really going to use my gifting to help to make life better.
Absolutely. That is a gift in itself to South Africa. So thank you for that. And it's why I'm speaking to you, because you made that decision. Yeah. Having said that, it's not common for Americans to just pack up and go and live elsewhere. I mean, I remember when I first came to the US, they have a world football. And I'm thinking, but who else is playing? It's just them. So
the World Cup.
World Cup, yes. So it's interesting when you find that one American that sees the world for what it is, and America with its place within the world. So can you talk about that? I see you're agreeing with me.
Very much. Absolutely. I've lived and worked in Europe. I actually have lived and worked outside of the United States for more years than I have at this stage in my life than I have in the United States. So I feel like I'm part of this kind of class of people who are kind of digital nomads and global. South Africa is my adopted country. I come back to the United States, I'm American, and then I'm looking at people, I'm like, I'm not really sure I fit here, anymore. Like, so, then I go to Europe and I'm grooving with my European friends, and so it's made the concept of home very complex for me. As a woman who, okay, So I got to South Africa. I did my stint at the Constitutional Court. I worked just as a volunteer researcher and kind of started trying to work off some of that karma, you know, from being an investment banker back in the bad old days of subprime and all of the naughty securitizations that led to the global financial crisis. And I knew that I didn't want to go back to that life. I'm divorced. My daughter at the time was about 6 or 7. And she's also like, you know, rough and tumble. And she said, yeah, let's stay, Mom. Let's make it happen. I mean, by then, you know, she had gone completely native. She was like speaking Zulu, and you know how kids are. They just, they are so resilient. They're just wonderful. They're beautiful. So we decided we were going to make a go of just having some time to get to know each other, because I was working such ungodly hours that I didn't even know my child, really. So it was just a beautiful, wonderful time. We just spent running around the country and visiting Zimbabwe and Swaziland and all these places. She ended up going to Waterford in Swaziland, by the way. But to make a long story short, I got a call from someone in the US government saying, listen, we are structuring the first ever infrastructure fund in Africa. We need somebody who understands US law, who can deal with US investors, who understands South African law. And like 25 years ago, there was probably maybe 2 of us. Yeah. And the other person was like, no. So it was like me, you know, they just caught me at the right time. So I ended up helping to structure the first ever infrastructure fund in South Africa. It was a $200 million fund. We then went out to entities like Momentum and Sanlam and others to raise additional capital from institutional investors, and we were successful. And that is an important pivot, because that is what I do today. I invest in women in the infrastructure sector. I'm involved in that in the United States. I can tell you more about the policy work that I've been doing since I've been here on the ground in the US. And I just never looked back from that. I knew that I wanted to be involved in the built environment, because if we transform the built environment, we can unlock historical patterns of injustice. We can quite literally make life better. And we don't often think about the fact that the built environment is not gender neutral. And we don't think about the people who are making decisions that quite literally shape how we move about in our world. And I want more women involved, because the thinking that we bring, the empathy, the compassion, the kindness, the generosity, our capacity to say, well, how far can a kid run in this development before they have to cross the street? Yeah. Makes things better. And then the guys go, oh yeah, we need more green space. And then they're able to sell the property at a higher price because it has more green space and more families want to live there. It's like, duh, right? And so, right, but you know, they're not thinking that way, right? Because we're meant to kind of run this race together, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's the work that I started doing, and wow, it has just been, I really have had the most incredible experience in this infrastructure space in South Africa and in emerging Asia as well.
Oh, wow. So we're going to touch a little bit on that, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing in the US, and also a comparison, a little bit of a view. What is it like there? What is it like here? But before we do that, I want to talk about a concept of a Sherpa. So a Sherpa is really a guide on Everest that helps you all the way to the top. They don't climb for you, but they support you. They're invested in your success as much as you are. And it's a coach that people sometimes have in corporate or during varsity years. Some people do. So who would you say has been your most important Sherpa on your journey to where you are today? It could be one or many. I just want you to touch on that and how the role that they've played in your life.
Okay, I will briefly, and I mean briefly, because, you know, it's so easy to talk to you. You're just like, you know, it's great. So I'll briefly touch on 3, because they're important. The first one was my brother. I had an elder brother who I mentioned the fact that my dad was a bishop, and he became really much more than a pastor to me. So he ordained me, actually. I went and I studied, and he ordained me. He said, the work that you're doing, helping to transform communities and helping to create jobs and wealth in disadvantaged and marginalized communities across all these countries is ministry. So even though, you know, this is not about necessarily converting people from a religious point of view, we think at this church, we think that this is ministry. And so we want to bless you as you go out into the world and give you credentials to say, hey, this is ministry. And I loved it. And so, you know, when he decided to do that, that just meant so much for my big brother, who was always like, I'm like, you're not the boss of me. You know, you're not my dad. You know, so I grew up like, hey, get off of me. You're not my dad. And so for him to, you know, for you to earn the respect of your elders, because he's like an elder, you know, it means a great deal. And so we became really, really just great friends. Unfortunately, he passed on a couple of years ago. And I'm still grieving, you know, so he really was the one to say, stay the course. So you ask me, why would an American leave America to go and live in South Africa? I didn't plan. I planned to just go there and work off some of that bad karma and go back. and then I really got serious actually about my faith and felt like I had a calling to do the things that I was doing. And so my brother really helped me to stay there, because there were times when I was sad, I was lonely. I felt like, you know, listen, the one thing I can say about America, if you, Sarah, decided that you wanted to move to Washington, D.C., within 10 years, you would just be considered an American. Your kids would just be considered American. Everybody would just be American. South Africa isn't like that. You can live in South Africa for 50 years, but if you're not born in South Africa, you are makwera, honey. All right, you know, right. I mean, I would go places, they were like, this Lungu over here. And I was like, what's so much Lungu? Okay, I'm not one of those. But, you know, so I was being called all these things. And I realized that I was never and will never truly be considered a South African. And so it's my adopted country, and I'm very proud of the work that I do there. But there were times when I said, you know, I'm hurtful, I'm good, I've done my bit. Let me go back to the United States. At least I don't have to worry about somebody kicking me out because I'm not considered the local. And he encouraged me. Marshall Kaufman is an elderly Jewish guy who has been a friend for a very long time. And I mention him because even before I really connected with my brother that way, I was somewhere in New York many, many years ago, being a banker, being like, you know, being very much like the men, you know, I mean, you can see I still wear pinstripe suits, although this one's white. Back then they all were black. And I was someplace and I just started chatting with this guy and he took an interest in me. And for 30 years, he has just encouraged me in all kinds of wonderful ways. He just, you know, he'll never let me pay for lunch. He's profoundly connected, very amazing in his own right. And I'm saying that to say, listen, your Sherpa can be the most unlikely person. So don't close yourself off to the possibility that you can have a Sherpa who's a different race, a different age, different culture, different gender. Just stay open to how wonderful life can be that way, right? And so he has just been just the rock of Gibraltar for me. And then the last person I will mention is someone that most people listening will probably know, and that's Wendy Lahave. She is a partner, a co-founder in Women in Infrastructure Development and Energy. WIND, WINDE .Africa is actually a play on her name. And we've been rocking and rolling with this WINDE consortium, which has brought together over 2,000 women in infrastructure and the related sectors, created jobs, created wealth. And so I had searched for so many years to find a champion. This needed to be an African woman because I was very much mindful that even though I live in Africa, I'm not African. I'm not considered African. I like to say that I wasn't born in Africa, but Africa was born in me.
That's beautiful. That is
And
beautiful.
so Wendy Lahave has been that African woman who could look past all of our differences to say, I'll roll up my sleeves. I'll get in this foxhole with you. We can do this. And she didn't need to do it. She had successfully launched WIPHOL, had been involved with the structuring of the Women's Development Bank. She's quietly been involved with most successful women's initiatives in the economic or financial sphere in South Africa and other parts of the continent. She didn't need to do this. But she has, and she has really, really, really been a great sort of big sister that could inspire and I could look up to. So I'm very grateful to have her in my life.
That is lovely. I think the reason I ask this question is because going into corporate for the first time, when I was given a coach, for me, it was like, oh, what am I not doing right? You know, because in school, you needed a tutor or special attention because you're not getting maths, you're not getting sciences. But it's turned around where I see people as successful as yourself. I've read about Barack having, coaches. Richard Branson talks about coaches. The value of actually having that shaper that you bounce off ideas on, that you know they're there. They're not going to run the race for you, but they're with you all the way. So that is lovely to hear that you attest to that. Mm-hmm. So before we go any further, I would like to give this opportunity to our sponsors who make this podcast possible.
Because It's There with Saray Khumalo is proudly sponsored by Vuma.
Moving on to contextualizing Sharron's world, your world. You know, you talk about women and the work that you are doing and investing in them and the youth as well. We didn't touch on that, with big ideas that have sustainable community impact. You touched on that as well. Looking at these specific demographics, what do you think is the incentive in empowering them? Why them? You could empower anybody.
I'm so glad that you asked that question. Can I tell you, Sarah, I literally believe that everything that we know and love is dependent on us investing differently. Let's just take women. We can get into a whole discussion about the innovation and the big ideas that sit within the younger members of our society. I think of myself not as a Black person or as an American or as a woman. I think of myself really primarily as an earthling. And that's important because I think looking beyond the boundaries that I could put on myself and just trying to think about my own capacity more broadly enables me to go into the boardroom differently or into the US president's office more differently. I can just get rid of the gunk and get clear about what I'm after. And I think it opens me up to allow other people to also see me beyond their own rose-colored glasses, right? And so because I think of myself as an earthling, what I then do is I couple that with my gifting to say, what are the burning platforms that we really need to be focusing on that will enable us to come back to that place of shared values, common ground? And I have a couple of them. So if we look at the fact that by 2070, we could have almost 4 billion people living in conditions or living in places that are as hot as the Sahara Desert. Just think about that.
Scary.
Africa is water stressed in many parts of the continent. The Western Cape is going to become semi-arid. It's already happening. There is nothing that could be more important for us to be talking about today than climate change. Nothing. Because without water, everything else is moot. And we don't understand the implications of climate change. We think we got a pandemic now. We are already seeing in other parts of the world malaria, mosquitoes that bring malaria, who are all of a sudden saying, wow, it's so hot over here. Why don't we just go over here and hang out as well? And you're talking about populations being decimated because they have no resistance to these diseases. Yeah. So we have not begun to get our minds around the fact that the tectonic plates on our planet have shifted and they're never going to go back to the way that they were. So in addition to the pandemics and climate change, we've got digital transformation. we're going to continue to need to be transformed digitally as a response to the disruptions that are going to keep happening. So we're never going to go back to the way we were. And so I believe that if we look at those dispositions that you really have to have in order to lead in this Bonnie world, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible, we have got to bring women's thinking, women's power in terms of their capacity to impact with purpose, their intelligence, their creative capital, and their resources to the table. And if we don't, we risk everything that we know and love. That is how important I think that this conversation really is.
I can feel the passion. And I believe that it's an important conversation, and you are the right person to champion it. So thank you for that. You touched on Wendy, with Wendy Lahave, women participation in more. Women participation is more often than not left out of the renewable energy narrative. But you have fought and championed, some of these causes through Wendy as well. A consortium with 2,000 women, you mentioned, SME owners in infrastructure and related sectors. Why is this important, and how did you get involved? And what is it? What is your role in this environment?
Okay, so I mentioned years ago, I was contacted to help to structure the first infrastructure fund. I then began to understand the importance of the built environment. I mean, back then, for example, you would take a playground. Playgrounds were built back in the day with little boys in mind. So little girls were always getting injured because we didn't build them for little girls. I mean, we just don't think about how important the built environment is.
Because there was no girl in the decision-making process.
Absolutely. And so we need to be involved across the value chain, from conceptualization and design through implementation to how we operate and maintain, right? And so of course there's no women involved in these discussions and in the conceptualization. So, you lose the value of that diversity in the thinking process. So what began to happen is, between my teaching project finance, which is, as an asset class is really the asset class that's used in infrastructure projects mostly, and the work that I had done structuring that deal, I began to be asked to advise on the structuring of smart city projects. That's what also got me involved with technology, because I began to look at the technology that was needed for sustainable water, energy, and food systems. And that's called the nexus thinking. And so I've been a pioneer in where water, energy, and food systems come together, which is why I'm so concerned about climate, because I understand the climate on water, energy, and food security. Yeah. Right? We've got to pay attention. This is the stuff that's going to take us out, right? Mm-hmm. And I began to get involved with these massive transactions, really across about 14 markets in sub-Saharan Africa. And I mentioned the Near East, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. I was advising on the Iskander project in Malaysia, which is one of the biggest smart cities in the world. And I began to realize that there was no one around the table who looked like me. Now that was important because of the things that we just talked about. You need to have women, people from different backgrounds. You need to have people from the communities that are going to be living in these places or who are impacted by this development as part of the conceptualization and design. They also need to have work. They need to benefit economically from development. Absolutely. Whose development is it? This is just the big companies that can afford to pay for the infrastructure deals? Is it just for the government officials? Whose development are we talking about? And so that is when I began to really get involved. And then renewable energy is a very, it could be considered a separate sector, but for me, it really is an important part of the infrastructure conversation. In South Africa, we got involved. Jeff Radebe at the time was minister, and we basically lobbied. You asked, what kind of stuff do we do? In addition to investing, we organized the women. So who are those women SMEs who are part of our group? Women in oil and energy, South Africa, women in logistics and transport, women in construction, engineering, the works, right? Yeah. And so we said, hey girls, We got a job to do. Let's go. And so we basically lobbied, the minister met with us, members from the president's office, and we said, hey, we represent the real mamas who are making this happen. Women's participation in the REAP, Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program, has been a nice to have. We believe that going forward, it needs to be a qualifying factor, and here are the reasons why. And we'd like to just give Jeff a big shout out because he listened. And you will see that the request for proposal is different in this round. You need to have women's participation in order to qualify. That is an example of the kind of things that we've done.
Yeah, wow, well done on that. I always say that the women of the 50s walked up to the Union building, which is why we're enjoying the freedom that we are. What are we doing today? I think this is the shiznit, the stuff that you're doing is actually making sure that the girl child tomorrow is represented, is confidently going to walk into those boardrooms because, we did something as a generation. So thank you. Americans like saying thank you for your service. So I'm going to extend that to you as well. Another passion of yours is aiding the idea of disruption. I noticed that on your email address as well when you responded. Given the uncertain times that we live in, what would you say is the biggest challenge in getting back to advanced, inclusive, big picture thinking?
I think it's mindset transformation. And that will be a good segue into, maybe where we want to land our discussion today. And because I'll tell you how I'm incorporating that into the climate and the women's stuff that I'm doing. So as a result of teaching at the GSB, one of the things that I do is I do a lot of work with executive training. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about leadership. And so shout out to the GSB. They have great clients and they often pull me into programs, and I get to design programs for some of the largest organizations and institutions in South Africa and actually across the continent. And so I think a lot about the question that you're asking. And if I had to say, you gave me one choice, one thing, it would be transforming mindsets, because I believe that transformed people transform businesses, transform organizations, transform government. And I think every government department, every agency, every school, every business, every civil society organization has a tipping point. If you get enough people who have a transformed mindset and you reach that tipping point, then the organization will start to shift. And sometimes all you need is just a pivot in order to go into a completely different on a different trajectory, which can be incredibly different over time. And so as a transformation agent, I spend a lot of time being a Sherpa on a journey that really is about transforming mindsets and dispositions, so that as we are moving out and we're trying to look at how to transform teams, how to transform organizations, we start with people who have a tremendous amount of personal capacity, because they've gone on that personal transformation journey. And that, for me, really has been, of the 2,000 companies that I've worked with over the last 10 years, it is, if we can get the personal transformation journey right and get a critical mass of leaders within an organization who are willing to do that and who are willing to walk that journey out, then we can make it happen. So I'm a Sherpa.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds exactly right. And maybe that one that this time that we are in needs. One of the things that I picked up, I met you, I think it's now 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years ago. But as I was preparing for this, I discovered, oh my word, you've got so many non-executive director positions, or you've held some. I don't know if you still are holding all of them in both the public as well as the private boards. Alexander Forbes, Momentum, which I am part of.
I hold on to those. Those are my two I'm holding on to, because they've been going through an incredible transformation journey.
Absolutely.
I love it.
But my question now is really, do you think there is hope for a good post-COVID recovery and a corporate planning enough around, South African organizations at the moment, whether it's in public or private sector?
Well, listen. Well, just to let you know, I've stepped down from just about everything else besides Momentum. And, Momentum short-term insurance acquired Alexander Forbes' short-term insurance. So now it's Momentum Insure, so MI. So I'm very happy to have been a non-exec on this journey because, of course, it feeds me. And then I feed the organization because I'm all about the transformation, right? So I have room for one more non-exec in case anybody's interested, but it's got to be a good one. It's got to be a good one. All right. So let me just shamelessly plug that. Listen, let me just be honest with you. I think that we are going to have a real mindset shift around the way that this new economy that I mentioned earlier is emerging. Yes. The way that power is shifting from the companies back to the consumers. You look at the workers here, for example. I've been locked out of South Africa now for a year, so I'm not, but I keep up, and I think it's happening there too. You look at places in the United States, businesses are struggling. People are saying, we don't want to go back to work, at least not for those fees. And you better also give me the right to work remotely. Otherwise, I'm not interested. And so there's power, people, productivity. We're dealing with prices that are changing as a result of the person who's making your taco saying, no, I'm not making your taco anymore for that. You have to pay me more, right? And so prices, so we got to get our minds around that. And then I think we are also, this is my pea soup recipe, which I use when I'm teaching. But if we look at prosperity, then we see that we have to have some policy changes. And I'm not just talking about government policy. I think we got to have some policy changes within businesses around these other P's in order for us to have a sustainable organization. South Africa is always surprising. Just when you think South Africa is on the ropes and it's lights out, South Africa comes back, boom, boom, and is in the game. I love it. So South Africa, you can never write South Africa off because South Africans know how to make a plan and make it happen. And it's one of the reasons why it is my adopted country. Is it going to be difficult? Yes. Can a phoenix rise out of the ashes? Absolutely. I mean, I looked at the way people were getting together and cleaning up after the recent protests and all of that stuff. You didn't see that in the media. And I refused to buy into that negative narrative. Yes, we do have deep, deep inequalities that are going to continue to plague us if we don't get it right. And we need to think about that from a business point of view. But look at momentum. Look at the amount of people that we have stepping up to volunteer. Look at the tremendous resources that are going into the Momentum Foundation. Look at the way that a big organization that's been around for many, many decades, like Momentum, is honestly and earnestly going on its own transformation journey and saying, how do we give back better? How do we get to higher ground and bring others along with us? Which is why I'm so happy to be here on this platform talking to you. And I was beyond myself with joy when I saw you win that award, and I was on the plane and I was looking at it, and then I saw the stuff on the tray on the plane. I was like, oh my God, everybody, I am an non-executive director of this company. Look at her, look at what we're doing. I was outrageously ecstatic. So well done to you and congratulations. I cannot think of someone who was more deserving. And it was one of the smartest things that we ever got right in terms of just, how we are dealing with our own social responsibility.
Absolutely. I'm very passionate. That's what Ubuntu is all about. Before I let you go, I have to ask you this, otherwise Nontokozo will not be very kind to me. She owns her success is the campaign that Momentum is running this month of August. Yes, right. And we're turning the M into a W. Women.
I see it upside down. I was I'm seeing that. Yes. I love it.
So what does the campaign mean to you? What does it mean to you for women to own their success, to unapologetically talk about their successes. Is this something that, as an American, you see as a given? Do you see it differently when you talk to African women, whether they're South Africans or elsewhere on the continent? I'd like to get your view on that.
You know, it's a great way for us to conclude, because I really honestly and sincerely believe that this is we could take this globally. But if we come back to South Africa, I definitely think that as an American, as a person who is the youngest of 8, I've grown up having to push and pull and fight my way through, you know. So I've been a tomboy, and I've been hanging from trees and kind of a rabble rouser, you know, for a long time. And I think that it's difficult. It's difficult for us to get it right, because when we try to own our success, you know, we've got the Hillary Clinton kind of pushback. We experienced that in America. She owned her success and she got clubbed for it because people said, oh, she's that, because she's too strong, she's too smart. She was the most qualified person ever to be president, but we didn't want her because we don't like her. Why don't we like her? So there's just like, you know, all of that going on. But then when we come with the kindness and the compassion and the empathy, it's like, is she really qualified? So then sometimes I have to show up and I have to be like, no, I am Dr. McPherson. I own a doctorate's degree. I earned it. I paid for it. I studied for it. I sweated and I cried for it. It wasn't a gift. So no, please, I'm Dr. McPherson to you. Thank you very much. And trying to get that balance right is an ongoing journey. So when they came up with it, I chair the Social Ethics and Transformation Committee for Momentum. And so I'm very proud of that. And so I get to, like, you know, get the inside skinny on stuff. And I was just like blown away. And so I would like to say that it is not a South African thing. It is not a South African platform. We are clearly a South African company, but we are really thinking much more broadly than that. And this is a platform that I think can be used to inspire, encourage, and enable women everywhere to do it. Different challenges for different women, depending on where you come from. India, Afghanistan, sisters in Afghanistan, we are with you. You know, American women who may be dealing with, you know, deep-rooted racial inequalities, which can exist in South Africa and other places. So we stand at the intersection of both, in some cases, gender and race. So we've got so many things that can overwhelm us. Yeah. We have to have the courage to own our success, because everything that we love and care about depends on us doing so.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharron McPherson. For being with us and for sharing so much gems and nuggets, and for the energy. I really, really want to thank you. And I'm sure our listeners have gained so much insights from your journey and from your generosity. And I hope to see you again sometime soon. This is...
Anytime. Would love to come back. Thank you so much, and well done to you. You are awesome. And just thanks to all your listeners, and just to Momentum for the support as well. So be well, be safe,
thank you,
and be blessed. Okay, bye.
Because It's There with Saray Khumalo is proudly sponsored by Vuma.